Can I jump in and say hi to Mr. Palmer, our chair emeritus from many, many, many years ago?
Chair forever,
Hey,
Mr.
Bob.
Palmer.
Okay, well, why don't we get started? We have 3 presenters this evening, all presenting on different potential projects for the eco-industrial park. And then I'd like to, as we're commencing the workshop, one item on the agenda that isn't there that I'd like to leave some room for at the end is just for us to have a little bit of discussion around our community conversation, kind of what worked, what didn't, what we want to, just while it's still fresh in our minds, to take a few moments to review that. So I'm anticipating about 30 minutes for each presentation with, a bit of Q&A at the end. I don't know how long each of you anticipate going for, but that's roughly kind of what we're shooting for time-wise, if that works for everyone.
Sure.
Okay, great. All right, so why don't we get started? Bruce.
If you let me, I want to go ahead and give a brief recap.
Oh, that's right. People. Yeah, go for it, Gus. Thanks.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gus Olmos. I'm the solid waste director with Alachua County. Just a real brief recap. Last month, I gave EPAC a presentation on the county's and City of Gainesville's zero waste plan. And as part of the presentation, we spent some time talking about the environmental industrial park and the zero waste grant program that I'm trying to get going. So what I'm still really trying to get is I would like to get your input in any of those 2 projects. And I understand you are kind of doing workshops. So if you just want to send me your personal emails with your ideas, that'd be perfectly fine. After the presentation last month, you guys got a brief introduction to one of the facilities that's interested in locating at the environmental industrial park. That's Florida Environmental. And there was some interest in getting more detail on their project. So after EPAC, we had a meeting with EDAC, which is the Economic Advisory Committee. And at that meeting, Florida Express, as well as 2 of the other companies that are here tonight, gave presentations to EDAC. So just to be clear, because there's been some confusion, I got in some emails already, we are not currently evaluating any company for siting at the facility. We are still developing the criteria on how we're going to evaluate those companies. That being said, I do hope and expect that the 3 companies that are presenting today are going to submit proposals to locate at the environmental industrial park. And these kind of meetings are very useful, at least to me, because it is all fine and well to talk about concepts and ideas, and this is kind of like what we want to see. But as David mentioned at the last meeting, this project kind of got stalled over the years, and we were not making that much progress. And it's kind of nice now to have people who are chasing me, saying, you need to get up to speed. So we're trying to move as fast as we can because we know we have local businesses that are interested in locating. So having that pressure is pretty helpful to get us moving. So with that said, leave the floor for Bruce.
Okay, super. I'm going to share my screen here to get the slideshow up. And I'm going to run from my, not from the presentation mode, because I always have trouble with Zoom trying to get it up there. So hopefully everyone's okay with just looking at it in development mode here. I'm going to minimize this so I'm not interfering with myself. All right, so my name is Bruce Welt. I am a professor at the University of Florida. In a way, I'm representing the University of Florida here in terms of its interest in participating with projects from a research standpoint that go into the eco-industrial park. But as well, I have a personal interest in this as well, not in the sense that I've started a company to do this, but I am, given the position I'm in and what I'm talking about, there's a number of groups, I would say, that are interested in doing a project. So to the extent that I may personally be involved or not, I don't know. But this is something I'm very passionate about. I've pretty much said that I'm going to dedicate the rest of my career to doing this. And just as a little more background, my background is chemical engineering. At the University of Florida, we have an undergraduate degree program in packaging engineering, which is a program I helped to develop. And in that sense, a lot of our graduates go and work for, major consumer packaged goods companies like Nestle and Danone and Procter and Gamble and the like. And so we're very in touch with what's going on there. And there are a lot of folks, in that industry that are up against a wall, and there's this, a cultural movement against plastics, which is somewhat irrational. And I hope to explain some of that here. And I say that because for many years we've talked about reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is a very important part of that. And of course, reducing anything, whether it's steel, aluminum, or plastic, is important. But it turns out, as we look at alternatives for different materials for packaging, plastic continues to come up as the least environmentally impactful. It might be surprising you to hear, but the least environmentally impactful of the alternatives. So, if we could figure out how to properly deal with the plastics and kind of solve the circularity issue, we could get there. So moving into the presentation, what I'm showing on this screen right now is kind of the big idea. So if you forget everything else, this is pretty much it. What we're talking about is an end of life opportunity, right? So this is the type of thing, it's regenerative, it is robust, and the technology is gasification. And when folks hear about gasification, there's a reflexive nature to say, oh, this is just another version of incineration, which is absolutely not true. And I hope to dispel that here, explain why the proper form of gasification can serve our needs very well. So in this sense, what we're looking at very quickly is mixed waste, right? So this relieves us of the obligation. It doesn't mean we wouldn't choose necessarily to sort waste, but it relieves us of the obligation to sort, which means that we can actually select, we could be very selective about what we pull out of the waste stream to put into the mechanical recycling stream, which has obvious benefits, to the extent that it can. So the point here is that this is not or, this is an and, right? This is something, if we really want to be zero waste, we really want to be responsible, we need to find an end of life solution. And that's what this is. So, so basically mixed waste would go into this robust gasifier. The primary output from this would be synthesis gas or syngas, right? It's called that because we can make stuff from it generally, right? And the primary constituents are the building blocks of everything, right? Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen in this mixture here. And what we're talking now, there are some folks out there that would say, okay, and it depends on the gasifier and how, what you're doing, what your feedstock is, and how you do the gasification. There are some folks that would gasify fossil fuels to make syngas and burn it to make power. Now, the criticism that is incineration has some validity, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about and the value is much greater to make stuff from it. So we're talking about taking the synthesis gas, and one of the simplest molecules to make after that is methanol, right? And methanol is a fundamental feedstock chemical that the chemical industry uses to make everything, including plastics. And in fact, very important point here is that one of the reasons why China stopped taking our waste plastic is because China commercialized technology that was developed in the United States by the Mobil Corporation in the 70s to convert methanol into plastics, right? So today, China operates massive facilities, and they're basically converting coal into syngas, into methanol, and into plastics, right? Instead of using petroleum. We're certainly not advocating for doing that with coal or fossil fuels, but any carbon source can be used. And for that reason, we're calling waste-derived methanol eco-methanol. And we see this as developing in a separate market, right? This is not just making methanol, for methanol's sake. This is basically delivering to the consumer packaged goods companies the recycled content that they so desperately want and are unable to get, pretty much. So this is the eco-methanol here, the waste-derived methanol is the vehicle through which recycled content can then be delivered into new products and packaging. So that's the big idea here, and I'm just going to move this on, get more into it. Now we're all very enamored with the clout of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, right? It's kind of interesting how this played out where, back in the early 2000s, Walmart with their scorecard kind of got everyone talking about sustainability and, moved into their sustainability index. And then ultimately, I think Walmart wanted to pass the baton on to an NGO. And now the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is kind of the repository for everything circular and sustainable. And what we find from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is they recognize the need for upstream and downstream innovation. And they have this kind of squiggly line over here exemplifying that. But if you follow their, the output from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, primarily, most of the messaging is about upstream innovation, right? And this, I pulled this from a guide that they provided. It says that this, we're just basically talking about upstream. This guide focuses on upstream innovation. There's very little in the downstream part, except that but they have some important developments there, which deals with mass balance accounting and whatnot, which is going to be very important when we talk about different ways of doing chemical recycling. But anyway, the point here is that we are not, we're focusing so much upstream, which is not going to get us there, right? We can't reduce our way to growing economy and and no waste, right? We can do good things there, but they tend to be incremental, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So they're kind of incremental. So what are we talking about here, right? So this main graphic here with syngas in the middle kind of is a reflection of what's going on. And this comes from an organization called the Global Syngas Technology Council, because the production of syngas is going on every day all over the world on purpose. This is not something we have to invent. All of the technologies related to this already exist. So I actually you can tell, I just kind of wrote waste over here, but that could be any carbon source that feeds into this, right? So what do people do with this? And this is where I want to differentiate gasification of waste for circularity versus gasification for power, or another, kind of the incineration analogy. There's several options here that are kind of important, right? So first of all, let's say, the red blocks here, this red pathway in, some history in World War II. Well, first of all, even going back further than that, before we had light bulbs, right? Most communities, in Europe and even in the United States had gasifiers in their communities, and the syngas they called producer's gas. And that's how we lit streets and did things like that, right? So we've been gasifying biomass for many years, right? Then in World War II, Germans didn't have access to petroleum, and they needed, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, all the stuff for the war effort. So they actually the Germans developed this Fischer-Tropsch chemistry, a whole area of organic chemistry. And they did, they basically gasified their coal and then produced their fuel this way. All right, now this is done, the South Africans did this during apartheid. And there's a number of efforts that are going on today that do this where they don't have, easy access to fossil fuels. Today, this pathway is becoming increasingly important for the aviation industry, because they see this as a green alternative to petroleum-based jet fuel, right? This is not what I am here to talk about. And I'm not necessarily saying we want to put a Fischer-Tropsch facility in the eco-industrial park. We don't want to make fuel, right? So I want to make that very clear. I'm just saying this differentiates us from that, right? Now, hydrogen, another important area, synthesis gas is a hydrogen-rich gas, and Toyota, Hyundai, a number of the automakers are basically looking out into the future, and they're recognizing that fuel cells are dropping in price faster than EV batteries, right? They're saying by 2030, it's likely they're going to be selling as many fuel cell cars in the United States as they are electric vehicles. For that, they're going to need a lot of hydrogen, right? And so in this case, we could take that synthesis gas, and through a fairly simple step, we could separate out the carbon, which is a carbon capture process, right? So the carbon monoxide gets captured in what's known as pressure swing absorption, right? Then we release the hydrogen, and the hydrogen's out there. Now, and I'll get to this little sideshow over here in a minute. So I'll let that go for now, but that gives us a source of hydrogen. The carbon monoxide could either be burned or it can be which is not circular, or it could be converted into another molecule. Because we've given away the hydrogen, we'd most likely make something like an acid, and that would be formic acid, which is the same acid that fire ants, use when they bite into you, right? So, but that's also a primary feedstock chemical, and it would be a carbon capture and a circular process. All right, power generator, you could burn synthesis gas. We don't think that's a good idea because it's much more valuable in what we want to do, which is methanol. Right, so methanol is kind of the first simple molecule you can make from synthesis gas, and it's a primary feedstock chemical for just about everything we make. So when you look at the major chemical companies, Dow, DuPont, Eastman Chemical, and they're all wanting to do the right things, right? They're involved in this kind of thing too. They all want this waste-derived methanol, right? So this is a type of thing they would line up to purchase. From that, they can make all of this. But the important thing is, and it's not just this, I mean, of course, polyolefins is plastic. The important thing here is that the methanol chemically identical to traditional methanol. This methanol carries with it that recycled content. So it gives the opportunity as this robust process allows us to capture all of those things we are currently being landfilled. So our rate for plastics would increase tremendously. And we would have a lot more volume of recycled content. So that allows these consumer packaged goods companies who are making pledges that by 2030, they're going to have 25% recycled content, 2050, it might be 50%. I mean, ultimately, you can make 100% recycled content from this methanol, but it gives them an opportunity to blend it. And it also, methanol is kind of like a fungible chemical, right? So if, let's say in Puerto Rico, the folks down there put a facility in and they were producing eco-methanol, and Eastman Chemical in Tennessee wanted eco-methanol. They wouldn't have to necessarily ship it from Puerto Rico to Tennessee. They could do an exchange on the world market. And that's where the mass balance accounting comes from. So saving a lot of emissions and really adding a lot of flexibility in there. So moving over to this side, I just wanted to kind of run through scenarios, right? So we have this gasification process that produces syngas. The question is the process circular or not, right? And we could look at the different options, right? So basically, in the old days when we would just use biomass, so feedstock being biomass, right? If you produced power from that biomass, which is what we do in GRU, as we have that big wood burning power plant here, that is considered to be circular, right? Because the carbon is then captured back in the biomass. So that is an option. I'm not saying that's what we want to do here, but I'm just trying to go through, these scenarios of circularity, right? So our trash today is a mixture. Right, so one option here would be to produce hydrogen. It's a fairly simple thing to produce the hydrogen. And we already have major companies in our neighborhood like Amazon, Walmart, Target, that have distribution centers. And all these companies have already made proclamations that they're moving their own operations internally to operate on hydrogen. So there's already outlet for that. And it's important to note here, right? This is not like burning trash, right? When you burn hydrogen, the only thing that comes out is water vapor. So there's no carbon in this, right? So when you burn the hydrogen, you just get water out of that. The carbon is captured, and we would make something like a formic acid. So this would then be circular because the things you make from the formic acid would be circular. Right? Again, biomass, hydrogen, and power. If you burn that carbon monoxide, that would be circular. If you had biomass and you produced fuel, right, which folks are doing, this is what the airline industry wants to do, that would be considered biojet fuel, right? And that would be circular, right? If you have biological material and fossil material, you make methanol, this is the proposal we're talking about, then that would be circular. Then what are the other things, the things that kind of turn people off that, is just like, another version of incineration, right? If we take some kind of a fossil-based material and produce power, of course, that's not going to be circular because you're essentially releasing the carbon, right? If fossil fuels if you take fossil fuel and make Fischer-Tropsch fuels, of course, that's not going to be circular, right? So the point here in looking at this is that this is like a Swiss Army knife of chemistry, right? And we can use the right tool in the right place at the right time to get the outcome we all want. right? Now, and there's another thing, this next slide brings it up, and it kind of gets back to, there's kind of like incentives going on in the consumer packaged goods and plastics industry, right? So there are folks that are making plastic today from not fossil fuel, but from sugarcane, corn, other fermented products, right? To the extent that we do that, right? To the extent that we have these kinds of end-of-life technologies available, it provides industry with greater incentive to move to bioresourced materials, right? So this green polyethylene, right? This is polyethylene. It's chemically identical to polyethylene. This is a Brazilian company. They make polyethylene from sugarcane, right? So, you can see that. So the point of the matter is that and it's not just polyethylene. There's all the bio-based plastics like PLA or PHAs, and there's a whole push into these things. Bacardi, right? They're in Jacksonville. Bacardi just announced that they're going to, basically they didn't really say it properly. They said they're going plastic free, but they're really just moving from fossil-based plastic to bio-based plastics. And so it's interesting because Bacardi does that on its own. So now or if you had this bio polyethylene, it's still polyethylene, it's the same polyethylene. And if you don't have an end-of-life solution, it really is not benefiting us in any way, right? So it basically just ends up in a landfill otherwise, right? So that's an issue there. All right, so downstream solutions, right? What's available to us? What are people talking about when we say chemical recycling, right? So not too long ago, chemical recycling pretty much 99.9% of the time referred specifically to the top row here, which is depolymerization of one type of plastic, right? The different plastics are made in different ways. And PET, which is the number one recycled plastic, is known as a condensation polymer. And all that really means is that two different monomers come together and a little molecule comes off, usually water, and they get put together. And it's an equilibrium reaction, which basically means it could be run in reverse, right? So for many years, people said, okay, PET is going to be this great sustainable material because we could depolymerize it. Suddenly, that's what we're doing. And in fact, Eastman Chemical just announced not too long ago, they're putting $250 million into a facility in Tennessee that is going to depolymerize PET, basically purify the monomers and then repolymerize it. And then you have new polymer, which is wonderful. But the problem with that, that's why these columns are here, feed robustness and versatility. The problem is that, well, there's two problems. One is PET, is probably the best recycling material we have out there. It's the kind of the success story of our traditional methods of recycling. But it only works for PET, and it really only works for and mechanical recycling. It only works for very pure, clean PET. So we're talking water bottles and things like that. So everything else, because we use PET in many things and in textiles and other things, it's not going to be used for that. So feed robustness is very low for this process, and the versatility is pretty low because you pretty much make the only thing you make again is PET. Another option is using solvents, right? And this is not really a recycling process, it's a recovery process because we're not really damaging the polymer. There's a lot of promise in this, but the solvent business, it's one, you look at it from the side of the polymer, it looks great, but then you have the whole chemical industry on the solvent side, which, that gets a little bit dicey in terms of the specificity of the solvents and where do the solvents come from. And, it's kind of like it's tough to contain that argument. So there's promise there. Maybe we'll make some good strides, but again, it's kind of like, usually you have categories of solvents that'll work on categories of polymers. So you'd have to have different vessels, operating on, it doesn't solve our sorting and collection issue is what it comes down to. All right. Pyrolysis is, in the family of thermochemical conversion, which gasification is. And essentially, it's an interesting story, but you'll see the folks that are promoting pyrolysis tend to be the folks that have invested capacity in refineries, right? So the petrochemical industry is advocating pyrolysis. And I'm not saying, I'm personally not against pyrolysis. I don't think any of us should be against pyrolysis. The point about pyrolysis is, though, that it is the process that has traditionally been used to make charcoal, right? Or biochar, or essentially it's the solid output that we have historically been after. But it also puts out a liquid output and a gaseous output. And historically, those have been burned to fuel the pyrolysis. Today, it's kind of switched up on us. And essentially, the folks in the refinery industry are after that pyrolysis oil, which is essentially a chemical stew that depends on what you put in, right? So I'm not necessarily against this, but there's kind of a few issues. One is it's not very robust, which means that we can't put everything into it like we can with robust gasification, which means we have to sort out the metals and foils and metallized polymers and stuff like that, which are, which is a shame to put them in the landfill. The other thing is that the scale of trash is probably at least 1/100th of that of fossil fuels. So the refineries are too big for the pyrolysis. So even though they are taking the pyrolysis oil in, the resulting outputs from the refineries are very small fractions of recycled content, which we're already exceeding in a lot of ways. So it helps a little bit, but it's not going to get us there unless we build new refineries, and I'm not sure that's going to happen. New small refineries, which kind of seems strange. Then we get into traditional gasification technology, which has existed for many years. Some folks have them in their backyards. They could run cars off of them, generators. There's different types of these, but essentially just using Eastman Chemical as an example. They're in coal country in Tennessee, and they've been gasifying coal to make syngas on purpose to make these chemicals for many years. Today, they're actually, to Eastman's credit, they're actually advocating robust gasification, and they're working on converting their coal-fired gasifier to run on waste plastic. But the problem they're finding, of course, is they're in coal country, not where the waste plastic is. So the cost of transporting waste plastic to their facility is not terribly smart. So the idea is that we kind of need a distributed gasification network, I would say, to be able to do this in a reasonable scale. So anyway, the traditional technologies can't accept, just like pyrolysis, they can't accept everything in the trash. But of course, the output, the syngas can be made into just about anything, which then gets us to robust gasification, which is what we're talking about. And the idea behind this is that you can literally put unsorted trash in it. And again, I'm saying you can, I'm not saying we want to do that because we certainly have excellent recycling opportunities for steel and aluminum and not so much for glass, but glass doesn't benefit this process at all. So there's no reason to put it in there. And then of course, there are the desired, plastics that that would be amenable to other forms of recycling. And to that extent, what this allows us to do is, the folks that want material for mechanical recycling, they could kind of get in line and say, hey, I want just milk jugs. And, and because they know that's very high quality, first run high density polyethylene. So you could just make a bale of milk jugs that would be, very high grade, and then someone else could take something else. But the point is that you can sort to the demand and extract a premium, because you basically can make them as pure as you like, rather than having to sort, but through desperation, to try to figure out, how to put everything back into the economy, which fail. We have to admit that that's not working, and it's not going to work. There's no amount of sorting we can do that's going to fix that. So this allows us to basically take the unwanted materials and gasify it, and then convert it into methanol or formic acid and do value-added things with it. All right, then here, this is kind of a look at one of the state-of-the-art gasification.
Bruce, can
Yeah, sure.
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just looking at the time in your scroll bar there. And I was just wondering how.
Yeah, okay, go. I just have a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah, of course. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, it goes very quick from here. So this is the big idea here that, all of these are examples of difficult to recycle materials. They all go in this thing, and essentially syngas comes out and it's circular. This is just an example from the Global Syngas Technology Council. This is where gasification is going on all over the world right now, right? So it's not new. here, this is to dispel some myths, right? I get this a lot, that a lot of people say, if only all of the material was compostable, right? That would be a terrible idea. And I'd like to explain why, just take a minute for that. And the reason is that non-compostable plastics, they end up in a landfill, they sit there and do nothing. And that's what we wanted to do. But when you put compostable materials in a landfill, the landfill actually acts as an anaerobic digester and produces methane. And landfills are like the second largest human-made emitter of methane, atmospheric methane. And methane, of course, is worse than carbon dioxide. So we should be much more focused on minimizing methane production. So it's not a great idea, like Bacardi is making, go into a biodegradable plastic without a plan for what they're going to do with it. And on top of that, the composters don't want it because biodegradable plastics don't make compost. They just kind of disappear into the air. And so it's just a problem for them. This is just some example showing that plastic versus alternatives is environmentally less impactful. So the idea of eliminating plastic is a very bad idea environmentally, I guess. And then, we talk about microplastics, and the reality there, that doesn't come from packaging, it comes from tires and textiles. And, so this is just summarizing the big idea. And then the last few slides are examples of what's going on in the industry, right? So basically the airline industry is investing in this directly. There's a facility out in Nevada. They're building another one in the UK, another one in Spain. This is a company out in Canada. They're doing hundreds of thousands of tons of trash and making chemicals and fuel and whatnot. This is a plant that went up in Oregon recently. They're doing medical waste and they're serving the hydrogen economy out in California. And the final point here is that after giving a talk like this for a while, a group of companies have gotten together, this kind of a grassroots thing, to do this, to help educate municipalities and the industry and about this kind of a robust option. So that's my thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that talk. I feel like each of your presentations, our group could probably spend the whole meeting asking you questions. But why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions? Anyone from the board that wants to ask something?
I have a question about the purity of the absence of toxins or residues for polyethylene for food purposes. How do you account, or how do you remove it and ensure that it is effectively removed when we're dealing with food consumption?
Sure, and I'm from the food industry. I have a degree in food science and deal with food contact materials all the time. This process is basically a rebirth of the carbon, right? So there is nothing from the original material that comes in. It's basically broken down to elements, and it is remade in a very pure way. So it is not like mechanical recycling where we just take a milk jug that might have been filled with gasoline and the gasoline gets imbued into it. Right. In that case, if the gasoline imbued jug went through this process, all of that carbon would be reprocessed and renewed. And it would be there's like no connection between the original use and the second use of it.
So whatever potential toxins might be there are chemically converted. They're disassociated and rendered just as carbon, and just another source of carbon.
Yes, and in fact, this is a very robust process that can be used on medical waste. It's actually used in India. There's a fairly significant facility in India that was built to treat hazardous chemical waste. So
okay, that's great.
Bob, did you want to ask your question? I saw you type something into the chat.
Oh, is it okay. So basically the eco-industrial park, to answer that question, is it a demonstration or profit, right? So the idea would be for profit. I don't think we want to do a demonstration thing, but at the eco-industrial park, I think the scale would be more like a demonstrator, right? So I think and this gets into the folks that are trying, looking at opportunities. where this one might be similar to the plant in Oregon, which might focus more on medical waste initially, which has higher tipping fees and things like that, in order to do it, right? In order to make a smaller scale facility profitable. But there's also opportunities. We're shipping 800 tons per day to a landfill. Palatka nearby is doing about 1,000 tons per day. So that the trash is there for a larger scale facility. And it's a good question because when you go to make chemicals, scale matters, right? Scale is everything. So the more, the better is what it comes down to.
Okay, I have a naive question, and maybe this just went right over my head because this isn't my background at all. So in this process of converting the syngas into methanol, are there any other byproducts that we should be worried about or anything like that?
At that point, the syngas is, and the thing is, the gasifier is a closed system. There's no stacks on it or anything, right? We're capturing everything. And the thing is, like filter, if there's filtration, there's things like that that actually can go back into the front of the process. But what comes out is a very purified synthesis gas, which is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So there's really not much of anything there. And through facilities that have been operating in Japan, looking at overall emissions of everything, they're basically an order of magnitude below acceptable levels, right? So it's like almost infinitesimal in terms of output.
Okay. Any other questions?
There is the one that says, what is left over after gasification? That was Melissa Hill. Was that you?
Oh no, that was Melissa. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, it's something I didn't really touch on here, but there's another side of this, which is that robust gasifier. The key thing is there's essentially a furnace at the bottom, a molten furnace that has metal and mineral oxides in it. That from the metal industry they call it slag, right? So you have metal and slag. And so if you had like a Doritos package, it has some layer. There are some, there's like if you had MREs, which had foil layers in them, that stuff gets melted down and recovered as mixed metal or slag, right? And those are industrial uses. And the one final thing there is that Ted Yoho, when he was our congressman, he was interested in this from the recovery of rare earth minerals from electronics waste. So that would come out of that lower fraction.
Okay, and then it looks like Melissa has a follow-up question. What is the energy
consumption? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an energy, this requires energy. The idea here is that we would run this on renewable energy, right? So in that sense, we wouldn't be so concerned about, the carbon emissions from a renewable energy source. That's one thing. In Gainesville, we have that, the wood power plant, but we're getting to Levin here in the next presentation. We've actually been talking about partnering on this. So he's talking about producing energy from biomass. So the idea would be renewable energy, but certainly the answer I give to this, especially to the industry, because everyone asks it. What I say is we need to develop a process that works first, right? And that will determine what the bar is in terms of energy. Over time, we will improve upon that, right? But what we're doing now isn't working, right? So I think we need to find something that does work. We can use renewable energy to power it, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bruce. And I want to give all the other speakers equal time. So
Yeah, sure.
we'll end things there, and then our next speaker on the agenda is Marcy. Marcy, are you ready to be next? Is Marcy here?
Sure, I'm ready to go.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'm also going to share my screen. Okay, you can now see my screen. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Good evening. I'd be happy to know that I don't think I'm going to need a half an hour to give this presentation. It'll be short and sweet, just like me. To be candid, Florida Express Environmental is a new client to me. Ms. Anderson asked me a pretty basic question last time we had one of these meetings, and I was not able to answer it. I'm happy to report that since then I have done a field trip to Florida Express Environmental and seen some of their facilities and learned quite a bit. Just as way of background, as I mentioned last time, I talked about Florida Express Environmental. They're a family-owned and operated business. I met many of the Paglias when I went to their headquarters. They've been in the business for 45 years. They own and operate currently 2 construction and demolition landfills. They own a sand mine, and they have the largest fleet of garbage trucks in North Central Florida. They provide recycling and waste management, solid waste pickup to several municipalities in the Marion County area. Florida Express Environmental is a big company to work for. They pay a living wage. They have been good environmental stewards in all of their facilities. In their 45 years, they have never had a non-compliance issue, which I think is pretty remarkable. And finally, they have considerable experience in Alachua County. Their goal is to locate a 40,000 square foot construction and demolition recycling facility at the Alachua County Eco Industrial Park. They are ready today to invest $5 million in creating that facility, and they will also create about a dozen jobs. By way of background, what is considered to be part of the construction and demolition debris waste stream primarily comes from 4 sources: land clearing debris, transportation related debris, which is primarily asphalt or other materials from roads that are ripped up or left over after road construction. Building related material, material that's left over after construction of houses or commercial facilities. And finally, demolition debris and disaster debris makes up a major component of the C&D waste stream. What happens at a C&D recycling plant is that the components of the waste stream are separated out. They separate wood into one pile, aggregates, construction, brick and block into another, metals, cardboard, and plastic are all separated out. The end game being that they try to capture the recyclables for reuse while minimizing the amount of residuals that are shipped to the landfill. Common products and uses of recycled C&D debris include fill for building roads. Crushed concrete and brick is typically sent to the East Coast for use in road construction. The East Coast doesn't have the same number, or doesn't have any of the limestone mines that they have in Florida's West Coast. So when roads are built on the East Coast, it is typically made out of recycled construction and demolition debris. Wood that is separated out can be remanufactured into wood chips, which are used in re-engineered wood. Wood can also be turned into pellets and used to fuel cogeneration plants and industrial boilers. Corrugated cardboard, like in this picture here, goes to the paper mill, where it is turned into toilet paper, paper towels, and other related paper products. And then finally, metals are turned into bars and ingots and reused in industry. The benefits to Alachua County from having this facility located here This would be a state-of-the-art, brand new recycling plant with the latest technology, operated by an experienced leader in the field. Will ultimately be able to handle 10 loads a day, which means conserving the remaining life of the existing Florence C&D landfill. Address a major component of Alachua County's solid waste stream that is not being dealt with very effectively right now, and advance Alachua County's zero waste goals. I mentioned that there would be about a dozen new jobs created. Specifically, there would be jobs for drivers, there would be a management position, machine operators, administrative personnel, and a sales representative. The anticipated compensation for those positions would be from $32,000 to $65,000 a year. All of the employees receive paid individual and family health insurance, paid telemedicine, a paid gym membership, 60 hours of annual personal time off, and 5 paid holidays in addition to the 60 hours of personal time off. As a self-employed person, I am extremely envious. Finally, there is the opportunity for safety and performance bonuses, and the company will match up to $5,000 a year in contributions to a retirement account. Additional benefits to Alachua County is that the facility would be located close to the Levita Brown Environmental Park and Transfer Station. Inevitably, when construction and debris material is sorted, there is some sort of generic solid waste garbage left over that would be taken to Levita Brown, generating revenue for Alachua County. So to wrap up quickly, Florida Express Environmental is anxious to partner with Alachua County and make this construction and demolition recycling plan a reality. The plant will advance goals of zero waste and the stated purposes of the Eco Industrial Park while creating much needed jobs in southeastern Gainesville. And finally, what I would like to impress is that time is of the essence. If material costs keep rising, and if we're not able to break ground soon, it may be no longer in the cards. So I hope that these selection criteria get to the county commission for approval sooner rather than later. And I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. We have one question from Bob Palmer. Would Florida Express Environmental intend to seek financial support from Alachua County to start this facility?
No, absolutely not. They have $5 million set aside for the facility. They're ready to go.
Okay. I can't remember what I asked you last meeting, but presumably that was answered in the presentation. So
you asked me something about the ultimate fate of the recycled materials.
Okay.
At least I think that's what you asked.
Any other questions?
Another thing I'd like to add is that it would be Florida Express Environmental's preference to purchase a lot rather than, they need 10 acres, purchase the land rather than lease it, but they're also open to a lease if that's what the county commission prefers.
Gotcha.
One last thing before I shut up is I think that having the C&D recycling plant there is possibly dovetails with the facility that Bruce was talking about, and also what the next speaker is going to talk about, which is turning wood into biochar. Wood could possibly be salvaged from the C&D facility and go to the biochar plant.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if any, other questions will come up as people have time to ruminate on everything. I know for me, I'm like, full of information right now, so it's kind of hard to come up with additional questions while I'm digesting everything. But yeah, thank you so much. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the next speaker. And of course, anyone, if you think of questions for Marcy or anyone else, you're free to pop them in the chat. And if you're still here, we can get those answered. So why don't we go on to, is it Levin?
Levin.
Levin Gaston.
Okay, thank you so much. And what I was hoping was that we could, Mark or Gus, go ahead and play I've got about a 10-minute PowerPoint that's all set up and ready to go. If you guys can go ahead and set that up. If not, I think that I can. I have to figure out how to share my screen. But if y'all can run that, it's about, like I say, it's about 10 minutes, and then there may be some questions. But I think that's the quickest and easiest way to do this.
Okay, Mark, is that something you can set up? Mark around. I know.
Levin, I think what we got from you were PDFs, not the actual PowerPoint.
Oh, really?
I think so, yeah. I just checked on the email that I sent Mark, and he has a PDF, so he won't be able to do that.
Okay, well, then I will go ahead and set up. I can share my screen. Let me open this up first, because I thought that I sent. Okay, I'm set. So I don't see a share my screen anywhere.
It should be at the bottom of right underneath your picture, where it says participants chat, reactions. Should be a big green button that says share your screen.
Share screen. There you go. This one.
Welcome to Achieving Clean Biomass Power. Our world is attempting to move rapidly toward the use of more secure, renewable, zero fossil fuel energy sources.
I'm not seeing the presentation. I hear it, but I don't see it.
Natural gas power plants and legacy biomass
Hang on just a second.
often fill in when power demand it. Meanwhile, our society struggles with an increasing volume of various.
So, can somebody help me with that?
You click the share screen button.
I did.
The problem is that when you probably have to run the PowerPoint, but it takes your whole screen, and then you'd have to share it. So it screws up. That's why I run it from development mode. So you might have to speak through it, Levin.
Okay. All right. This is new for me, guys. Let me try one more thing here.
Sure.
Share screen. All right, let's see if this works.
Hold on, Levin. I think I got it. Let me see if I can do that.
All right.
Okay. Share screen.
There we go.
Perfect.
Hold on a second. Okay, how do I start it though?
It's like we get to see it or hear it. We get to do one or the other, huh? All right, let's do one. Go ahead and pull yours out. I will share my screen. If you will stop sharing yours, I will share my screen. We'll try it one more time, and if not, then I'll just go ahead and make an explanation of what we've got, and we'll go from there. How's that?
Okay, go ahead.
To
You getting
achieving
it?
clean biomass power.
No,
Our world is attempting.
No?
no.
Okay.
We'll have to get the live performance.
All right. Yep. I guess I need to practice a little more with it. I've always been able to do it so far. Here's basically what we've been doing. We are a company that has been in business next June for nearly 50 years, and we have been managing the urban forest, and we recycle the urban forest throughout Florida. We're currently managing between nearly 600,000 tons of the urban forest a year throughout from Jacksonville through Gainesville and down into Orlando and Tampa, and in Clearwater and even further soon. And we have pulled together 3 separate legacy technologies. And these technologies allow us to bring in the urban forest. And a lot of people don't understand about the urban forest. In the 80s, I saw a presentation from the Florida Forestry Association that showed that after development in the cities, what happens is there's actually more trees than there were before the development in the area. And so throughout that needs to be managed. There is a significant amount of trimming, of mowing, of all of that kind of stuff, tree removal. There is site contractors, tree service contractors, all of that is generating urban wood waste or materials from the urban forest. And one of the things that we learned very, very early as tree service contractors was that when our truck is full, we're out of business till our trucks get empty. Well, in 1986, we learned, or the George Kirkpatrick recycling bill made everything that we were doing to make this go away quickly and efficiently illegal. So we actually, with the help of Alachua County, Levita Brown, the environmental protection director at the time, helped us site a facility on 121, first state recognized recycling facility for the urban wood waste in the state of Florida. And so the idea now is that we are bringing this material in. We need about 130,000 tons of clean wood waste. And Marcy is right, we can use clean wood waste. And also there will be some other stuff. There is synergies between this and circularities between both Bruce and Marcy that allows us to operate together. But with that 130,000 tons, we build a 5 megawatt biomass plant that generates electricity, but makes 27,000 tons of biochar every year. And now the one new patent is we will also capture materials and make about 5 million gallons of diesel. And so there is virtually, we can't say that there is no wood waste, but there is virtually no waste from this. We capture millions of gallons of water. And by the way, we don't use processed water. We don't need wastewater. There is no wastewater involved. Other than, normal wastewater to take care of the employees. And we capture the carbon from the solids and also the carbon from the flues, also hydrogen. And we have no emissions. And we're very excited about what we're doing. And so that is about 5 minutes of a 11-minute conversation.
Do you see that?
I do see it.
Yeah. Okay, so is that the The presentation minus the Q&A, or?
Yes, yes. I had a copy of it.
Yeah.
That Mr. Gaston
I was-
provided.
Okay, and I was just making sure that Mr. Gaston, was that the conclusion? When you
Yeah,
said-
really, I mean, there are a few things that we did that I was going to discuss afterwards, and I thought that there might be some questions that arise. We currently have about 165 employees. There'll be an additional 10 to 15 employees and that does not include logistics. There'll be some additional drivers that bring materials into the plant, and then of course, there will be, because when you think about the logistics of 5 million gallons of diesel, there will be people that have to take that out. It's got to be sold. It's got to be all of that kind of stuff. So there are other things that are involved, and of course,
I suddenly can't hear Mr. Gaston. Am I the only one?
I can't hear it either.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I
I
can-
think you cut out. Yeah, it looks like he's connection's frozen.
Can he hear us? Nisha, can you?
Let's see.
Type something in the chat feed, maybe?
Yeah, Levin, can you hear us? Maybe type in the chat if you can hear us.
I no longer see him as a participant. I think he's fallen off.
I think he just doesn't want to answer our questions.
Yeah, he may be trying to reconnect. That'll be my guess.
Yeah, I think he got booted.
Okay. While we're waiting for Levin to come back on, is Bruce still here? Or did Bruce leave as well?
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I had a question. You mentioned early on in your presentation that plastic was the least environmentally impactful packaging when considering alternatives. Is that like, is that found somewhere specific in the literature where I can look at it, or how was that kind of determined? Because that was an interesting kind of fact to throw out, and it kind of made me, like question, what I had thought. So I was just wondering if there was a little more background to that.
Yeah, and in fact, this on the slideshow there, you'll see on the slide I showed a graph, and that's kind of like a result of 70 something life cycle assessments that's been done on the topic, because it's an important topic. But basically, when you look at packaging materials, we have aluminum, we have steel, we have glass, we have paper, right? And they all can't do it all, right? So, and the thing is, if you look at, like, why don't we recycle glass? Well, it requires an enormous amount of energy to melt it down. Same thing with metals, we have to melt them down. Plastic requires very little energy actually to form. So if you look at the full body of the environmental impacts, in terms of the different materials, and using the emissions of CO2 as a metric, that plastic usually comes out at the bottom of that, right? So it's the least amount of emissions. Now we're all offended by litter in the ocean and the environment, and that makes us very upset. But the reality is that as much as it looks like it is, it's actually very little. And packaging, right? So for consumer packaged goods is really the least offensive in terms of the impact. So when people talk today about like microplastics is a big topic, a lot about small pieces of plastic that interfere with whatever. Most of those microplastics come from wash water of textiles. We put plastics in textiles, and our washing machines just wash out the small pieces of plastic. The most other, or actually the largest contributor to microplastics is the wear that comes off of our tires, our automobile tires. So, the plastics that we use for goods and bags and spoons and things like that really have very little impact on the environment other than the unsightliness in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely
Well,
kind of, oh, was that you, Bettina?
yes, I'm sorry. I wanted to say something, but I think you also heard my dog. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to chime in. You say spoons and whatever the other packaging material doesn't really have a lot of environmental impact. But what about wildlife? Wildlife.
Oh, okay,
you
yes,
see-
wildlife.
You see turtles that have plastic straws in their nostrils. Then you see ducks that have plastic wrappers around their beaks, etc., etc. I think that's a big impact.
Well, it is if you're the turtle or the duck, but there's not, we're not based, and I don't want to, I'm not downplaying this, right? I also do not like seeing straws in the noses of turtles, but the reality is that it's a very rare occurrence. And the turtles aren't being, it's not like they're being driven to extinction because of plastic in the environment. And I'm not saying that plastic belongs in the environment, but I will say this, that we can't have our modern society without plastics. The idea that we would eliminate plastics is crazy. If you just look around, if you go to the hospital and you look at all the machines that are connected to patients, that's plastic, those things. We can lightweight cars with plastics. We can do a lot of beneficial things. We preserve food for much longer. And there's a lot much more environmental impact from the inputs that go into growing food and then throwing it away because it's not fresh. So we have to, when we look at how we're using plastics, we have to understand what are the benefits and the costs. Now, the final thing that I would say is that one of the reasons why I think that plastics are ending up in the environment as much as they are is we have this cockamamie recycling system that isn't really recycling the plastic. Right. So it makes it very difficult for consumers, with the bins and what do we do with different materials. So we have robust end-of-life solutions. I personally think that the industry and communities can have basically campaigns that focus on littering and make littering a very, not acceptable thing to do. And I think we could capture a lot more of that waste and we can reduce the generation of a lot of it.
Well, so I want to follow up on wildlife. I'm a biologist. And so this is really important to me. I'm sure you've heard about the seabirds that eat plastic, or the whales that eat plastic and then they die because, all they have in their stomach is plastic. So I do think it's a huge problem.
Well, I mean, it is a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying that I think, the idea that we have to eliminate plastics counts, the value that you get from plastics, and not just humans, but, even the wildlife as well. So it's more a matter of being smarter in our use of plastics and working on mitigating litter. And that's really the important part, is mitigating the litter.
Nisha, I'd like to say that we had Levin Gaston speaking, and he's back now. I'd like to go back to him speaking.
Yeah, he was done with his presentation, but now that he's back, let's open up questions for Levin. Levin, did you have any final points that you wanted to make before we open up for questions?
Well, I think that we were talking about, we're going to add 12, 15 additional employees. We currently employ about 165, and that does not include logistics. That is people bringing material in and people that are moving material out. That's the biochar and the diesel and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think, I'm not sure where we lost you. It was really interesting. When I lose somebody on one of these things, I freeze out and everybody else keeps talking. But here, I kept talking and everybody else froze out. So I'm not sure where I lost you.
I think you had finished the majority of your presentation. That was the final point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so questions for Levin. I have a question, and I think you touched on this, but if you could maybe expand on it a little more. The difference between what you're going to do and the biomass plant that we have now.
Well, the biomass plant that we have now does not necessarily work with urban wood waste.
Okay.
They get a large amount of material that is actually harvested wood. And some of that, I think that is what they may call unmerchantable woods, but it is harvested for the wood plant. Ours is urban wood waste, and something is going to happen to it. And there's two ways to make that a pollutant. One is open burn it, and the other is bury it. And those are the two things that are happening to it. There are other people that are managing. No, let me say it another way. There are people who manage this throughout the state and throughout the country. And they say that they are composting it or they're doing other stuff with it, but it ends up in their C&D landfill. And so one of the real things that I'm very impressed about Florida Express and Marcy is they're not bringing a C&D landfill. They're bringing a C&D recycling facility. And so whatever they can't recycle will then, that's measurable to go to Levita Brown, and we'll know what that is, or it'll come to us, or actually Bruce, I think, can handle it all. So that's really kind of cool with that. It is that material is not being properly managed hardly anywhere. And we do a tremendous amount of composting throughout the state. It's one of the most exciting things that I do, and it's a big but, by being able to pull out the high carbon material and turn that into a biochar makes compost way more effective. And the things that are going on in agriculture and what we're able to do with biology to improve production and the environmental quality of what's going on in agriculture is pretty amazing.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I know where the Gaston facility is on 93rd or 441. Is that your facility?
That's one of our facilities.
Is that where your products would be taken care of? Or
Well,
you're gonna be moving into this new facility?
we would use the new facility for that particular material. And it may be that we would use the facility on 441 as what they call a primary grind or primary processing facility. And then the materials that are suitable to go into to that facility would then go to be transported to the facility at next to Levita Brown, the Eco Park. And so what we're doing, we've got a facility on 121. We have facilities in Jacksonville and in Orange Park. We have facilities in Ocala and two facilities in Brooksville. We have facilities in Tampa, and we're about to, we have a facility in Clearwater. And so we are really throughout the state, two facilities in Orlando and down in Christmas. I don't know where Christmas Florida is, but and so we're doing this throughout, and we currently are managing enough material throughout the state. We could open 5 of these plants, and that's really kind of exciting about the idea is it makes our energy a little bit more distributed. You can flip a switch almost and disconnect us from the grid. And so in areas where there are hospitals or army bases or even charging facilities, those kinds of things in case of a disaster or problems. We are base load and emergency power. And so, yes, Gainesville was our first facility. We opened in 1986. We laugh all the time. I bought a Poland 361 from Bill Warner in 1972 and borrowed a pickup truck from a friend so that we could make some money on the weekend. My brother had been working for a tree service contracting company for about 4 years. And not long after that, we had general contractors liability, and we were a real business. I was still in high school.
Wow.
Bettina, did you have a question?
Yes, so just very briefly, Levin, because we didn't hear much of your talk, unfortunately. Can you just summarize in a nutshell again what exactly you are doing with the wood waste, so-called waste?
What we'll do is we'll look at 130,000 tons of the urban forest. We'll make 25,000 tons of biochar. We'll make 5 million gallons of diesel. We'll capture all of the solid and all of the gaseous waste. We will capture millions of gallons of water from the wood. And there basically is, it's not that there's no emissions, but there's virtually no emissions, less than 5%.
You mean gases emissions like methane? I mean, when you say emissions, what kind of emissions are you talking about?
What we actually will be capturing methane will be, actually, I don't think there is methane. The big things are nitrogen and carbon, and we capture those and we will be using those.
As biofuel, I guess. And yeah, I'm sorry. And you were also talking about composting, right?
Yes, ma'am. I do have composting, but that's not part of this facility. That is material not suitable for these kinds of materials. And I mentioned this to the economic development group the other day. I am more excited about what we do with composting than anything else. In our 50 years in business, I'm more excited about the next 10 years. And composting and what we're doing in that part of it is why that I am so excited. But the material that we will be composting would not necessarily make good material, the high carbon material for these other products. And so, but composting and vermiculture is amazing stuff, but that is actually agricultural processes. Those need to be done on the farms. They need buffers, they need space, they create noise, they create some dust, they create some odors, they create some of those other things. And they don't need to be in $100,000 an acre industrial property. They need to be on a farm somewhere where that material is actually going to be used, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question in terms of the 3 facilities that would be, set up were all 3 of your projects to go forward. How much of the park would of space from the park would that encompass, and how much would be left? I'm just trying to get a sense of how big these facilities would be.
It would take a little over a third of the available acreage at the end of the day.
Okay. So still plenty of room for other businesses.
Exactly.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the, sorry. Oh, wait.
You can go ahead.
Oh, I guess I heard an echo. The question regards medical waste plastics. I'm excited. Oh my God, getting a reverb here.
Yeah, I see that there are 2 of you signed in. Maybe that's why.
Okay. Let me leave this one. Okay, sorry. I had to switch to a different computer. I'm very excited about the robust gasification because it can do, I suspect, a far better job with medical waste plastics that would normally go to a medical waste incinerator, which is a notorious place, if not run properly, in producing dioxin because of the chlorine present in PVC plastics. So if it is an effective method, therefore, what is the future fate of medical waste incinerators if robust gasification ends up competing with it? Because I want an effective, clean solution for dealing with it. We cannot go back to glass in research labs. I worked for over 30 years in medical research labs and biomedical research labs, and it is inconceivable. You cannot make a 96 well plate or 160 whatever well plate out of glass and have them cleaned. When I was in the late 60s, I looked at a job in Merck Chemical. They took me to a room where I would have been assigned for my summer job cleaning Petri dishes. They were stacked from floor to ceiling. They took up the entire room. And this is just for Petri dishes looking at the fungi that would affect paint for painting wood and rot and this, preventing rot. There's no way you can do biomedical research with glass. And if anyone thinks that that is not the case, they have not experienced what I did.
So, you asked about first of all, there are a couple of things. One is we don't necessarily like having halogenated plastics, even in gasification. However, the fate is not dioxin, it is in hydrochloric acid, which is very common in any thermal process. When there's chlorine present, there'll be a fraction of acid that comes out, and that is easily neutralized, right? So that's basically dealt with right in the gas stream. But in terms of dealing with medical waste, I believe that this is definitely a better way to go. As to the fate of the incinerators, maybe they'll find something else to burn. I'm not sure.
You really surprised me with what you just said, that combusting chlorine-based plastics doesn't result in the increased production in dioxin?
It depends. So dioxin is if you're familiar with the molecule, right? It's a fairly sizable molecule. So at the temperatures that operate and the time frames of the exposure, there's not enough time to actually make dioxin. So the fate of it ends up as hydrochloric acid. That's been well established.
Well, the one thing I had heard about regarding at least the cement plants was that if you try to suppress nitrite or nitrogen oxide production, you elevated the dioxin level. If you suppressed by adjusting temperature, if you try to suppress dioxin production, you elevate nitrogen oxide production. Is that even part of the equation? I thought it would apply also to medical waste incineration.
Well, it all depends on the residence time of the reactants that would be necessary to produce the dioxin, right? And in this case, it's just it doesn't have the time to produce it, so it's not formed. So in other thermal processes, it depends on the stack height and the duration of the chemicals as they cool down and have opportunity to react. In this case, it's very hot where they can't react, and then it's quenched, and there's not enough time for dioxin to form in that time frame.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Well, I want to thank the three speakers tonight. And I know for me, it's a lot of information to take in all in one sitting. So if I have any follow-up questions, or if anyone else on the board thinks of anything else that they'd like to ask down the road, is there I guess contact information on the slides we received tonight, or anything, any way we can kind of reach out if we have any feedback or questions later on.
Sure, my contact information was on the slide, and I'm actually going to put it right here in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll put mine in the chat too.
Yep,
Thank
and
you.
me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, Gus?
So just very briefly to give you the timetable that we're working on, like Marcy said, time is of the essence. So I'm hoping to have a draft document with the actual criteria that I can circulate for comments in a couple of weeks. So I certainly will send one to Mark so he can distribute to the committee. My goal is to get this document to the board early on January so we can get it approved and start getting actual proposals, vetting them, and get things going as quickly as we can. And also, even though it's not related to this, but since Bruce mentioned it, I'm going to put a plug in here. One of the other projects that I'm working on is litter control. Litter is a big issue in the city and the county these days. So I have a litter team. We're actually going to meet tomorrow. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions on how to control litter, please send me an email. We can use all the help we can get.
Well, I will have to say to you guys, good luck with that.
Like it's the only help we can get.
I have been, as long as I can remember, part of environmental projects, and I have been absolutely recycling and taking care of everything that we have. And still today, I've been married for 35 years. I look in the trash and I'm pulling out stuff that needs to be recycled in my own home, and I'm pulling trash out of stuff that's going to the recycle stuff in my own home, people that I've taught for all of their entire life. So good luck.
Right, but the problem, Levin, is it ends up in your bin, and then of course we have a little wind that comes through, and it ends up all over the street, and it ends up as
Right.
litter. The point I would say, Gus, is that we have to simplify. Let's
There you go. Circularity.
get everything in the trash.
All in one space, and it all gets done out, and that's absolutely amazing. One of the things that happens with us, Bruce, is that people think they're sending it to the dump. So as you can imagine, I end up with all kinds of things hidden in things that have to end up going to Levita Brown. They go in our,
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, Gus, I am very excited about what you're doing with litter. Let me know how it works.
This is a litter team. Is it
So
volunteers?
No, so we got reps from Public Works, environmental protection, keep Alachua County beautiful, and current problems.
Okay.
So we're actually meeting tomorrow. That's why it's fresh in my mind. We're gonna meet tomorrow and try to finalize our presentation. But yeah, it's a big issue.
Yeah.
TikTok.
There you go.
I have a question for Gus.
Yeah.
What's the next step in terms of finalizing the criteria?
So the next step is for me to write it up. I mean, I think I got all the input that I'm gonna get before I actually put something in writing that people can read and pick at it. So that is the next step, to get a document out there for people to review. It shouldn't take that long. Once I get that done, I want to get that to the commissioners as soon as possible.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
All right, once again, thank you to all the speakers. And you're welcome to hang around. I think we're gonna go into something that's not really related to anything you'd be interested in, but
I'll bid you farewell.
Okay.
With that enticing introduction, I think I'll sign up.
All right, well, thank you so much
Good
for
night.
coming. Good night.
Thank you.
All right, so I wanted to, while it's still fresh in our minds, kind of discuss our last community conversation and you know, if anybody has any pros or cons or feedback regarding it. Who, just quickly, among all of you here, who was actually at the conversation? I can't remember. Okay. And then
the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, so I think most everyone here was there. I mean, one thing for me, I'll get to you in a second, Melissa. One thing for me was I feel like that we could have done more with just getting the word out about it. I mean, we did have that kind of unfortunate scheduling conflict where it was going to be on Facebook in conjunction with Zoom, and then there was somebody already scheduled to be broadcast on the Alachua County Facebook live stream that at that time, so we couldn't capture some of that Facebook audience. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what people think we can do to kind of get the word out more. You know, one idea that I had was, I don't know if it's possible, you know, to have it be a Facebook event or something that we can, an easier way to share it, you know, quickly with other people and other groups, is one idea. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks, Nisha. I agree. I didn't. Well, that was my first community conversation I had been a part of. But it didn't feel particularly well attended. I know that the notice went out with Alachua County, as well as 1,000 Friends of Florida also shared it on their social media channels. And I did manage to get it in the Florida Conservation Coalition newsletter. But the one thing that I will note, also with the caveat, is me being a person that works permanently remote and is on my computer all day, even if it's a topic I'm interested in, it's pretty tough at this point. I think going on close to 2 years of Zoom, that I think overall that there is a decrease in online webinar participation, well, at least from the events that I've been a part of or helped plan or things like that. I think it's really tough to have folks come out for another Zoom call. So I will say that, but I do agree. I think if there was a Facebook event for the event as the county to be able to share and populate through that channel, that's another way of doing it. And yeah, I am curious how many people attended. I saw who was on the Zoom, but not sure if there were more than what was showing up on the screen. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, Trista's asking if we have a count of how many people. I'm not sure what the official count was, but I think that the number of attendees, you know, on Zoom was the number of people who attended. So that's something that we can kind of just rewatch the Zoom and maybe see it. Do you have that on hand at all, Mark, the number of attendees?
My recollection was a couple dozen, maybe. I'd have to look up and see. It was more than the previous one, but and more than both of the previous ones. But the first one had, you know, a couple thousand views on Facebook, and communications will post this on Facebook. But I think the one with additional on Facebook, I think part of it was it'd been so long since the previous forum that might draw some interest. But I also kind of like concur with, you know, what Melissa's indicating, that I think there's a tendency now, because I know I'm on countless Zooms meeting every day. And it just gets to a point where I think there's some overindulgence where you just kind of want to break. I think that's one. I think another is that, and there are so many, and this is a good thing, I think, there's so many training and presentations on climate change related right now, various sources like 1,000 Friends of Florida, and just ones that I actually have to attend, that you get to a point where it's almost like oversaturated. You get to a point where you kind of want to break from it a little bit. And so I think that may have had some to do with it also, but I think this one was a good one that Paul gave, because it wasn't really all that geared just to climate change. It's, Florida in 50 years type approach. And so I think that was a good kind of break away from that. I'm like, when Melissa had a couple other sources, I think, again, I'm a little disheartened as well that there was not more people watching, but I don't know the answer as to how to draw that. I also do think going to the 1 hour format was a good one, because when you see that, oh, this is a 3 hour presentation or 2 hours even, but I think there's a tendency about certain people, go, that's just too much time to commit to what they don't know what made that, part of that presentation they want to see. Whereas a 1 hour, even just with one speaker, people know that, I think there's more of a commitment towards that. And I think that was a good decision on the committee to go that route.
Yeah, I think so as well. And Melissa's saying that she agrees that the max hour is good, especially from what, Melissa pointed out and some Trista kind of seconded, which was, and you as well, Mark, that people are getting oversaturated with Zoom meetings and webinars and things like that, and the topic of climate change. So yeah, good points. Bettina, did you had some?
Yeah. So I agree with what you guys say. I think it's too much Zoom. And also, by the way, I couldn't attend. I would have attended, even though I'm not a friend of Zoom, but I was working. But maybe, we should start really offering these community conversations in real time again, moving away from Zoom. So I'm not sure what's holding us up right now, because in other places people meet again.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That could be, yeah.
There's not a support that. I respect that, Bettina, but with the Delta variant, we went at the county from kind of opening things up to shutting things back down again. And there's a few things. There's obviously the risk factor, but there's no way of knowing exactly how many people to plan for. And what kind of seating arrangements you have to accommodate that in presentation. And one of the benefits of the Zoom is that you can have presenters that are, like in Paul's case, they're talking from someplace in Orlando, or the young lady that was speaking from Miami. You're not going to get those people coming to Gainesville to give a presentation on something that really you might, if you didn't have, even if you had 100 people show up, they're going to put themselves at risk. And so by going the route of the Zoom, it actually, I think it opens up doors, for more participation. But other interested individuals in groups that are giving presentations, you're somewhat competing with those. So having said that, then, can't help but wonder if maybe the committee wants to have other, presentations that are kind of the climate change, but quite on the edge, just like tonight. Those presentations for, affect more locally issues, particularly in relation to what Gus and solid waste are doing, but that's in your backyard, and I think that may be something is rather than kind of mix it up a little bit, have some presentations that are more geared towards climate change and others that are, something more local when those opportunities become available, I think is maybe something that y'all want to consider doing,
Yeah, and I think that was part of the kind of argument for doing this, Florida in 50 years presentation
Right.
was to bring it back to localizing it as much as possible, and making it, not just a presentation that, you could see, on any kind of environmental organizations
Right.
schedule, but something that's specific to us. So I like that. And I like the idea of keeping it relevant to Alachua County or to Florida, because there are so many potential. I mean, I could probably just, go on Google and find a Zoom to go to tomorrow on climate change if I wanted,
Well, and you're right. And I think that was reflected a little bit in Bob's presentation. It's like it was a broad brush, kind of like an Al Gore inconvenient truth type, big picture type presentation, which was good. But I think for the audience that you're targeting, it's like you're almost preaching to the choir. You're not, bringing anything new to the table. But you're reiterating, what issues are. So I think from that standpoint, maybe having a fresh view of other topics mixed in actually opens up more opportunities for more interest. I'm just guessing there. Otherwise, those individuals that go, oh, another talk on climate change, it's like they get kind of,
right.
burned out on a little bit.
Bruce?
Yes, what I have found in leading meetings here is that I get the most audience when I do a hybrid meeting with some in person and other people on Zoom. When I do all Zoom or all in person, I don't get nearly the number of people that I get in a hybrid meeting. So perhaps that's something we could do for future community conversation, is do a hybrid using a smaller venue, figuring that a lot of people will do it on Zoom. Thank you.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. One, I agree with what Mark has been saying about the fatigue that sets in. People who are not, they don't focus on the issue very much, and they peripherally hear general statements about, and they habituate to the information, and they no longer are shocked or concerned about the relevant data. And then there are others who are tired of the generalized statements or essays or presentations and want some meat. And so particularly in a 1 hour setting, it might be good to provide a list of references so that if someone, given the fact that it's only 1 hour, you can't get into any depth or explore things. But if you have references at the bottom somehow provided, people can start to explore on their own. It's making it like a buffet kind of learning experience. And some will focus on some parts of the buffet, and others will be disinterested in science particulars. And you've got to try to provide a little bit of everything. Some of those references might be very generalized and others might be highly technical. Another thing in terms of recruiting, because we're so, I guess, desperate to get more people involved, we may perhaps, members of the group, individually volunteer to tap into groups, affiliations that they have where they know a lot of people. My wife is a member of United Church of Gainesville. I don't participate, but I go to men's lunch all the time, and most of the people there are retired faculty. And we spread the word. Or a couple of times I sent the secretary in the office a message to get the word out on some bulletin board of the church, an online bulletin board, that certain issues are going to be talked about in EPAC. I don't know how effective that was, but at least that's one possible way of doing it, for individuals to assign themselves a task to get more people.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and that kind of, it's kind of piggybacking off of, or an extension of the kind of homework that we give each other, or that we give to members while we're planning, you know, like you go talk to this potential speaker, you go talk to this potential speaker, and just extending that and saying, okay, now we've got our speaker, now we've got our talk, now you go talk to this group and you go talk to your group over here, and to kind of continue that process and actually recruit the audience as well.
The
I like
more
that.
bulletin boards you tap into, the more it can expand. And there are some churches that really focus on shepherding the environment. I'm trying to think of the term that they use, but they even have committees sometimes affiliated with that. So
Yeah, and I want to give Melissa credit because she kind of did that this time.
cool.
So thank you, Melissa, for doing that.
Right.
One other on the topic of keeping it local, and keeping it local. You know, there's kind of local topics that are always relevant that we can present on. We can also take it one step further, maybe, and kind of try to coordinate the timing of our conversations with something that's happening, you know, maybe within the county commission, or just an issue that's kind of got, you know, some excitement around it, or should be getting, because, you know, it's going to be discussed in local government or something like that, and to kind of shine a spotlight on things that are relevant, you know, timely as well.
I just want to say one last thing about people's participation. When the Newberry cement plant was an issue, there was a dispute among those who were trying to oppose the plant, that, oh no, the head of the Alachua County Medical Society thought that the citizens at town hall meetings would not be interested in hearing details, scientific details. And the vice president of Florida Rock was taunting us to, where's the beef? Where do you have the information? You talk about science information, where is it? And when that stuff was presented at a town hall meeting, he became defensive, as though the presenter was being hostile because he had data. And the citizens, the audience, it's as though you just injected them with something. They all got aroused by it because they were not used to seeing scientific evidence. And they got really fired up. And it's a rarity. When you do that, you'd be surprised at how reactive the average person can be.
Reactive in a positive sense, or were they like
very positive? They were all fired
okay.
up. I said, why don't we hear more of this stuff? You know,
Yeah.
It was really something. And then the newspaper reporter said, commented about the data presentation, about articles pushed back and contradicting the lies of the vice president of Florida Rock, the chemical engineer. And he congratulated the person giving the report, and then the person who did said, well, why don't you publish this stuff? What if you published everything that Florida Rock said as or gospel, but you never published anything from the citizens who had done gotten some documentation? He had no answer for that.
Okay. So any other feedback? And do we want to, you know, in the next meeting, do we want to pick our next topic, or does it feel like we can do that? I know we have the list, and then if there are any other that anyone has come up with in the interim that they want to add to it, we can always have Mark pass those on to us. How does everyone feel about picking a topic next meeting for the next conversation?
Well, Nisha, do we plan on another community conversation for this year?
I'm not sure if we want to do another one this year. I mean,
follow-up question. Are we still focusing on climate change next year? I thought it was just for this year.
Well, no, it's never really, I mean, really been the last few years, well, last couple of years, and then there was a forum prior to that on water resources. I would suggest that, you know, if we have, not if, but when we have a local issue, just like what, you know, Gus is facing now with the eco-industrial park, that those opportunities, you know, can take precedent in terms of selecting. I mean, you have your listing of topics on climate change that you're kind of going through, but that's not to say that if there's something up there that of interest to the committee, there feels like it would be of interest to the public as well, that, you know, you could you know, bring that to the table and then work it from there. I think, and I don't want to put Trista on the spot here, but I think, you know, in the same way with George, I mean, opportunities also present themselves with people working on, just like we saw tonight with Bruce, you know, some options of what people that are working on some interesting issues at UF that we may not be privy to, but, you know, once we get information associated with it, then we can, I think those are good opportunities to, you know, present to the public, because as we all know, you have kind of worked somewhat in a silo in some cases, and in other cases they do get word out, but it's like, can it get all dispersed out to everybody that maybe EPAC could assist with that? So I'm like thinking the context that you have continued to make at UF is a good thing to kind of keep tapping into as to what is happening, you know, both now and in the future in terms of, you know, issues.
yeah, Gus.
So just to follow up on what Mark said, for whatever reason over the years, we always had this distinction between solid waste and environmental issues in the county. You know, in my mind, they're all the same. I mean, solid waste is an environmental issue. And since there's no solid waste advisory group, and there's never been one, until you guys kick me out, I'm planning to bring all my issues to you. And there's nothing more local than garbage. And solid waste is a very local issue. So I think if you want to focus on local issues with a local impact, I'm your guy.
Well, it's good you stuck around then.
That was a requirement when he left EPT. He had to still stick around.
I'm used to it. I just can't leave.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Gus. I think that's definitely something that is a great candidate for a conversation. So it sounds like maybe December feels a little too early to nail down a topic, but maybe we can be kind of thinking about potential topics. And, you know, Gus just gave us a great idea. And maybe we can think about topics around solid waste. And Gus, if there's anything more specific that you have in mind around that topic, would make for a good community conversation. We're all ears.
So the three main issues that I'm working on right now are, you know, the environmental industrial park, which we just talked about, the zero waste grant, and those are moving pretty good. You know, later is going to be a big deal. It's not directly related to what I do, but I'm the one who's kind of leading that charge. So littering and illegal dumping is a big problem. Recycling is an interesting thing. I mean, if you look at recycling, the way the state measure recycling is not something that I necessarily agree with. It's just the numbers are kind of fuzzy sometimes. So we're pushing in a different direction. The counties in Florida came up with an alternate way to kind of measuring progress instead of a one size fits all. So that may be something you guys want to look into. So, I mean, yeah, like I said, I don't have an advisory group to rely on. So my plan has always been to rely on you guys.
Okay, so I have environmental industrial park, zero waste grant, litter and illegal dumping, and then how recycling is measured by the state.
Right.
Okay. Okay, yeah, those all sound like good potential topics. And then yeah, so I guess we can keep those in mind, as well as the list that we already have. And then if we want to just maybe quickly revisit and see if there are any new topics that have surfaced, or if anybody has any suggestions in December. And then we can maybe get a final list out to everybody, after the December meeting, that we can then vote on in January, and we can pick up from there and do our conversation in the new year. Does that sound like a plan? Okay.
Yes, I think that's a good plan.
That's a resounding.
Yes, I think Melissa's right. I mean,
Good
things
plan.
kind of slow down during the holidays, and
Yeah.
and, there's not that. There's less interest, I think, from that standpoint in terms of. But I think I'll try to, in terms of internal at the county, some things kind of slow down a little bit too. We gives opportunity to kind of catch up on some things, but so we. Just thinking off the top of my head, we don't have anything like really hot profile issue right now. But when they come up, then I definitely bring it to the committee. But we're trying to kind of stay low key. I guess you're right. We have enough hot topics as it is in general, but it's like we'll just keep that in mind. But again, I mean, it's a matter of just staying open communication, and just throw out ideas and brainstorm. I think, there's no limits to what you can do with, these virtual presentations. And so nobody's indicated that, to me at least, that what you're working on, like just this past one with Paul Owens, I mean, somebody would say, well, that's more of a planning related issue. I'm like, really? It's kind of like, it's still environmental to a certain degree. And it's like, why, if EPAC's not going to give those presentations, who is? And if nobody's doing it, why not? So like, I think you kind of like, I think y'all kind of, by going into the climate change issue, which is obviously issues beyond just environmental, but it's like you kind of opened up a little bit of opportunity there to kind of cross over into other related issues that others that may have not only interest in, but don't even know they have an interest in until it's presented to them. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's something different. So, so I think it's a good niche to have, and when it gets to the point where we have something that involves voting and, political decision on, how y'all support something, then, we'll get to that point and we can, make a forum, for the public, but it's not something in general that the county's been, supporting unless necessary. So.
Okay. Mark, do we have okay, Bettina? Oh, Bettina says she has to go. Thanks for coming. Do we have elections next month? Or when do we elect officers?
No, I think That's a good question. I think it kind of coincides with new boards to come on board. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked to see whose tenure is up next summer, but that would coincide with that. So it'd be like June, July, I think.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, we're at 8 o'clock. Does anybody have any anything else they'd like to talk about before we adjourn? Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. I think you're muted.
I have just a couple of comments. One is I'd like to congratulate George on a good letter this morning in the paper. And the other comment, listening to Bruce give his talk today, I have not heard such a robust selling of plastics since the movie The Graduate.
yeah,
Thank you.
he was not lacking enthusiasm. He has a passion. That's good. Plastic.
Okay.
Well, now I'm gonna have to read the newspaper, see what George wrote. So.
Oh, yeah, George, I didn't know you were in the paper.
It's scandalous.
All right. That's your MO, George. So
What's that?
you're known for
I
that,
have
George. You're
literal
scandalous.
things that I'm questioning about. Ed Crabb endorsed the legalization of marijuana, and I certainly partook many years as a youth and as a middle-aged person. But learning about particulates, as you know, I have a passion against particulates and their adverse health effects. It's fine if you take the CBD or whatever it is you want to do in a liquid form, either on the skin or by eating it. But it's quite another thing to breathe in particulates produced in any way, shape, or form. And I've been through this, given the presentations on what happens in the lungs with the macrophages and free radical production and all that scary stuff. And I don't understand why it's even being considered. I think it's because people are not aware of the fact that any particulate is a risk. And should EPAC address this? Do we have to wait for the county commission to advise us as to what our goals are? And I guess I'm just throwing that out as an idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing to consider. I feel like it's kind of an argument that just is not even on the table for most people.
It's not even on anyone's radar.
Yeah, it's not on anyone's radar. So
that's the key, is you've got to make people aware of what it does. I mean, I enjoyed smoking for years and years and years, but I know what it does. And just as a particulate, the macrophages cannot tell what's alive and what's dead. So they see a particulate and they go, oh, we got to kill it. And they fatigue, they call in the troops, and then the chemical warfare, indiscriminate collateral damage occurs, and all the good healthy tissues get damaged as well. And the free radicals go around inducing all sorts of problems in blood vessels and nerve tissue and everything else. So
yeah,
Makes them down good brownies.
yeah, it does. It does. They last so long too. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting issue. We could pursue it.
Maybe it doesn't have its time yet.
Okay, well, anything else? All right. Well, it was a great, good meeting. I didn't know how we were going to get through 3 presentations. I just wasn't, maybe because Scott wasn't here and David, that helped. But anyway, no, but I mean, I love when, I love when they go off on these things. And we usually get a lot of good thoughts and ideas around those tangents and questions. But yeah, good presentations today, and good to see you all. And I think we'll adjourn.
Nice, Nisha.
Okay.
Like,